Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another session of Morning Gym Poetry, which has a theme today of Kansas poets and their poems. Doesn't necessarily sound very exciting, but actually, Kansas has some very good poets and some very good poems. I don't live in Kansas anymore, but most of my own poems were written there. And the Kansas poets work hard and write some beautiful stuff, as you will see as we go along here. The first poet I'm going to read from is me, Jim Ransom. And this is a good starter for this particular program because its title is Poetry Everywhere. I used to bemoan the fact that poetry seems to have left the public forum, leaving us only the strident residue of pillow ads. Then I went for a walk, and I saw poems fluttering all around me, mayflies reciting while leaving a pond. The prettiest ones were from the Flint Hills, insects hovering about one butterfly milkweed, the brown-eyed Susans, and the scurf peas. I started to hear poems flitting around my compost pile. Others from moths that came to hover over tomato blossoms, tiny gnats, and insistent mosquitoes launched themselves at me on windless days, shouting, "Wherefore goest thou?" in tinny voices. My ears felt a barely audible bug shout. I heard things like, "Now let us play," and "Her beauty doth so inflame my sense." While cruising off Alaska, the dolphins leaped in the ship's wake, singing all the while, and whales sounded in more than one way. Then in San Francisco, I stopped at a bar where I could inhale the not-so-faint scent of pot smoke. A cause of rejoicing for the poetic cockroaches running up the walls to the hot lights where smoke condensed around them, and they all fell high to the barroom floor. I bedded down at a nearby hotel, quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner, or was it a faint chorus? I hoped it was not bedbugs spouting villanelles. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I certainly enjoyed writing it and reading it to you today. But I'm just reading that to introduce other Kansas poets. And the next poet is my old friend Ruth Moss, and her most recent book of poetry is called Puzzled, as you can see from the title. And it's a beautifully illustrated volume, too, with artwork by her cousin, who lives in Germany, I believe. And there's some great pictures in this. But we, as poets and poetry listeners, we're interested mainly in the poetry itself. So here's a representative poem by Ruth Moss from Puzzled, and it's called Soulmates. You bring your umbrella, and I'll bring my crystal vase. We'll set up house together in some gym crackery little place where you can store your suitcase, where I brew a pot of tea with hopes and hesitations and steeped leaves from a hazelnut tree. You bring your religion, and I'll bring my Persian cat. Perhaps a bottle of Merlot and a thrift store welcome mat. You'll cook the spaghetti. I will play the mandolin. Evenings will find us shiny and wearily numb from the raptures of sin. You bring your neuroses, and I will bring my pain. We'll bleed through the rough edges until most of those dragons are slain. Then you'll pull out the swans, the hearts, and the galaxies far, far away, and I will respond with a villanelle and a calla lily bouquet. So bring your fool's gold, dear, and I'll bring pennies galore. We'll have enough to rent paradise for a year and a day, maybe more. Soulmates from Puzzled by Ruth Moss. That's one of the poems in there that I really like the best. And there are many others that I could read, but we do have a time limit here. However, if you want to get more of the art and more of the poems, get a copy of Puzzled by Ruth Moss. Okay, so there are other poets in Kansas besides Ruth. Here's a poem from a young woman poet in Kansas whose name is Melissa Fite Johnson. And she also has a book entitled While the Kettle's On. While the Kettle's On. Poetry by Melissa Fite Johnson. Nice cover. I really enjoyed it. The poem I'm going to read is called 1931 for Mama and Papa. When he said, "Be my wife," she thought about it, being his wife, collecting eggs and walking miles to sell them, loosening his children from her body, dying in the same town where she was born. She'd convey brilliance through Scrabble games, not college. Though her children would go, he'd work too hard, die 13 years before she did, and her last days would be willed away in a nursing home. At 19, she could picture this future, this little life, and she took his hand, walked with him to the justice of peace during halftime of a school ball game. That's a very interesting, ironic, whimsical, and sometimes sad poem, I think. But it's a brilliantly thought through and perfectly done poem by Melissa Fite Johnson. And here's a picture of the book again. All right, let me look at my notes here and see what's next. Oh, we have another poem from a Kansan, and it's a poem gritty with rural Kansas, and it's called "The Couple Who Once Lived on This Farm" by Roy Beckemeyer. And this is from a book by Roy Beckemeyer. It's called Stage Whispers. Stage Whispers. and it's a book of beautiful poetry by Roy, with a lot of variety in it. And so let's hear this one. It's called The Couple Who Once Lived on This Farm. We didn't know them, what they looked like, what they said into each other's ears as moonlight's quadrangle morphed its way across the bedroom floor. What she thought as she stared through the steam, poured the boiling water off ears of corn or small red potatoes. How he scraped mud and manure off his boot heels every time he came to the door, the sound grating or pleasing depending on their moods. Perhaps we can learn from the dust on that sill. Purse our lips. Blow up a cloud of particles, the thick harvest of years, the accumulation of dandruff and skin cells, talcum, the dried crumbs of biscuits, pollen from mullein, from corn, from blue cornflowers. We might sniff something in that dust, sneeze, develop antibodies for specific things we never suspected, never imagined that we could ever, all these years later, come to know about the two of them. So that's The Couple Who Once Lived on This Farm by Roy Beckemeyer. An excellent poem, a thoughtful poem, a poem full of irony and cleverness. I mean, how cleverly he's taken us from the beginning to the end and giving us unexpected things all the way along. So I hope you've enjoyed these poems by Jim Ransom, by Ruth Moss, by Melissa Fite Johnson, and by Roy Beckemeyer. They're all excellent poets, and as far as I know, they're still writing in Kansas, and I'm not anymore. I currently live in Pennsylvania. But that's it for today. I hope you will agree that there is truly poetry everywhere, at least, especially in Kansas. Bye now. See you again in a week.